I'm going to value those costs pretty much consistently with costs that were incurred today, then you see that it's a much bigger cost. And so that's called the discount rate. And so the study that we're focusing on in today's discussion is one that a group of federal agencies, the Interagency Working Group, convened by the Environmental Protection Agency, and a report that they published in 2016. And it shows costs that depend on the discount rate. If you have a low discount rate, it's a bigger number because you're putting more value on the future. And if you have a high discount rate, it's a smaller number because you're saying, I'm going to let them deal with that. It's not that important to me here in the present day. And so this table 2 is the set of numbers that they published in 2016. And the reason we're focusing on that in particular is because the legislature in 2019 identified that set of numbers as one that they wanted to be applied to investor-owned utilities. And in particular, it's not just all the numbers in Table 2, it's the column that's the 2.5% discount rate column. So, I didn't white out the table, I gave you the whole thing. But what the legislature landed on was the 2.5% column for investor-owned utilities. They actually did that twice in 2 different bills. So in 5116, the cost, they adopted that set of costs for electric utilities for certain purposes. That's in section 15 that I've printed on this sheet. But then they did the same thing for investor-owned natural gas utilities in House Bill 1257. Also in section 15. Who would have thought? And so for us, the Department of Commerce and the consumer-owned utilities and their customers and their stakeholders, the legislature didn't do that. The legislature said that Commerce should determine the social cost of carbon values that need to be used in the analysis that consumer-owned utilities do. The legislature didn't say, pick a number that's even higher. And they didn't say, go easy on those consumer-owned utilities, pick a lower number. They just said, as determined by Commerce. So we need to determine. And what we felt like a logical place to start this discussion was with the values the legislature established for investor-owned utilities. And so what we've tried to do on the back of the sheet is give you draft language that incorporates the same cost values that will be applied to investor-owned utilities and see how that works for consumer-owned utilities and their stakeholders. And then we've also tried to address a couple of questions that came up as we were looking at this, some of the details around that aren't directly addressed in the IOU section of the law. I do want to acknowledge that once we have figured this out, we've said, okay, here are the cost values that consumer-owned utilities need to use. There's a lot that has to happen after that, because in the resource evaluation and planning work that the utilities do, incorporating the social cost of carbon is a complicated exercise, one that will depend on how the utility is doing its analysis. So I don't think that there will always be one exact right way of doing it. And there are complicated questions that will come up. And those are going to get punted today to when we talk about the planning rules. And we're going to be doing that in a near future workshop. So I want to acknowledge that there are important questions about how you incorporate these cost values when you're making resource decisions. But all we're trying to do by the end of this year is put specific numbers into rule so that the utilities can get to work on that planning and know what values they need to input. So that is the lecture on this body of work. And I would say that, I'm happy to take questions that are about, tell me again how that is calculated versus, but also some things like, I think that's fine to do it the way you're doing it, or I think that it should be some other way completely different. And so I guess for me to have,
I'll say my invitation. Do you want to do the invitation first?
Well, I don't know. I just wondered whether you want to get any kind of clarifying questions first, or do you want to do that as part of the exercise?
I think there's value in doing it as part of the exercise in the end, because
so
we're going to have a group conversation.
So I'm encouraging your questions, but not like right here, right now, but instead as Rachel guides you through the exercise.
Okay. So our invitation to you is, in your baskets in the middle of your table, you have 3 colors of Post-it notes. Each color of those Post-it notes represents 3 different things. This activity is known as rose, bud, and thorn. So I have a visual cue. So a rose is something that you like about this document or the things proposed. A bud, the green Post-it, is maybe an opportunity or something we may have missed. A thorn is something maybe you don't like or is negative that you want to bring up. It can even be a question. So how this is going to go is we're going to, at your table groups, you're going to get 2 minutes of self-reflection time. And you're going to choose either a rose, bud, or thorn, or a combination of all. It doesn't matter if you just have roses or thorns. That's okay. So you'll have 2 minutes of self-reflection at your table. After that 2 minutes is over, I'm going to ask that each smaller table group has a discussion for 5 minutes, and they pick one representative from the table to go up once you're done having your discussion and place them in their ordered places. So pink Post-its will go here, green will go here, and blue will go here. After that 7 minutes is over at your tables, we're going to have a facilitated discussion. So Glenn's going to come back. We're going to try to bucket some of the commonalities that people are having or questions. And then we're going to go through and talk about what are the roses, the buds, and the thorns. Does anyone have any questions about what I've asked you to do? Okay, so your 2 minutes will begin now, and I'll cue you into when your 5 minutes will begin. So go ahead and grab your Post-it. That's a good question. You right now, you should consider with this. This is your individual reflection time. So take a look at the reflection in your capturing your thoughts around your
I'm guessing.
So we're going to do individual first, and then we'll do table talk. So you get 2 minutes alone, and then you'll do a table. It's fine.
I think beyond that, there was a lot
Well, I'm saying they're both real and
Oh, I have some.
the question I have.
I'll go look at
Real.
These are all.
I have them. I have not.
It's in the hierarchy and the.
So if you have it now, you can begin talking in your table group for 5 minutes. If you have that.
But I'm part of it.
You're talking about federal government. Or probably a negative on the benefits of
All right, everybody's ready.
My perspective on that is I don't see why you're saying, okay, I know this is law.
That's why I'm asking.
I have. That's why I don't want
All of us would have to.
In terms of the damage function, why would we? I'm not exactly sure how that works. When those really operate. And then there's the language in four about. Are those adjustments?
Well, so then the first
Because I can imagine if there's any disparity. Right, and I would argue it's exactly.
for us, it's just like.
I don't know if you want that. No, I don't
Oh, yeah, so that's like a whole resource.
Well, I said no.
No, do that.
Oh, they got it.
No, that's all right.
Then you make everybody read the report.
Make an analysis. I will. They're getting pens.
My question is.
I'm gonna give them a little bit longer.
Yeah.
now doing, the business is doing that, there's a separate set, like, they take it off, and like, all of it. Kind of knock that together, everybody over there. And if you move forward, that's
I guess if we're not a trivia.
yeah, it's anonymous. You think they can identify?
Yeah, wait a minute, we're part of the free, right?
Yeah.
Give one
Taking the higher numbers?
My first one is
So, it doesn't, it doesn't matter.
No,
No, it's not the same thing right here.
But this one is different.
Well, I was already, it was
So if you haven't already, you can now have your representative get up from your table and place them on the appropriate box. Oh.
Very well.
You'll figure it
There's opportunity there.
So let's
That's okay. That's all right. We can work with that.
They have a seating so we can't have
Flyers this year? Oh, okay.
All right, here it comes. Fresh things. All right, I'm calling us back with the official tally.
Here's the bell ring.
You want some on the
Color was wrong.
That's all right.
We don't want to know who messed on it.
Oh,
Yeah, we're gonna go to this side of the room, so people who have company here. All right, Glenn, where would you like to start? Where should we start? Do I have any votes for?
Going back there.
You want to start with rosebuds or thorns?
And Rachel, louder.
Louder. Okay. You like the rose?
with Rose.
Okay.
Good idea.
All right. Let's see what
And
we
you
have.
match. That's awesome.
I
That's
just
right.
intentionally. These are the good things.
I see how you are now.
So, Glenn, since I am not from an energy-related background, are there certain things on here that you see as of now that could be bucketed? It looks like there was some self-bucketing, so there's two, clear on what SDC should be used, and discount rate.
Yeah, so I see there's three here that say it's good for the investor-owned utilities and the consumer-owned utilities to be using the same values. Oh, here's another one.
Is this another one?
It's a social cost after all, so good point.
Company values and statutory SDC?
Yep.
That's the
There's
same?
another one where.
I'm getting it.
Let's, and this one maybe is, this one says use the statutory values. And again, I think that's the same basic point that, given that the investor-owned utilities are going to use it, it makes sense for the consumer owned to.
That's, here, oh no.
Okay, so that one would be, this one is a little different, and it's good that in the draft language, we've provided some upward flexibility if a public entity determines that a higher value is appropriate for them, that we've given that flexibility to them. And this one says the same thing about appreciate that you can apply a higher value. Here we've got, it's clear. So just the clarity, I think, is the rose. This one says utilities have experience applying it. This one, the utilities have experience applying it. This one is that these values are good. So I guess that is it's good. You know, it's a good value on its own merits. And another one that says it avoids controversy on inflation method. It says use 2.5% as best approach for streamlining purposes. So I would put that one in the same category as getting consistency across all the different places where it's used. So
So this is
That's how I would-
consistency
Yep.
here?
consistency with the clarity, kind of the merits of this particular set of numbers, and flexibility in the draft rules. Those are the buckets that I see.
Okay.
So,
It's open to have a discussion if anyone has questions or is ready to move on to the buds. It seems like the roses have three categories that we
Uh-huh.
can see pretty clearly.
more or less, yeah.
Okay. Should we move on to buds?
And the buds are the ideas or the things that we might adjust a little bit or
Mhm.
whatever, yeah.
I mean, it can be questions too.
Yeah,
There were a
questions.
couple. All right.
Yeah.
So do you want me to read these out? It seems like. So how and see.
CO2 equivalent.
Okay. How CO2 equivalent ton to different types.
Uh-huh.
It's a methodology.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Do you want to bucket these, Glenn, for me? I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, so there's one wondering about if the floor will be updated and how this will happen. That's a good question.
Okay.
One is calling to say, basically use a higher number now as soon as possible. Think about the discount rate. There's a question of whether the discount rate is real or nominal. Can we get the social costs in 2019 dollars? So I think that's just like a factual question. One that's read the report. Is the author willing to
Louder.
elaborate on that? Read the report.
It's an opportunity to go back and read the actual report that the team wrote in 2016.
The interagency working group report. Yeah, that's true. And
It may not have been on the top of it. I don't think it made the New York Times bestseller list.
yeah, and we do have a link to it in the documents, I believe. And yeah, I would encourage anybody to who wants to get a better understanding of it to go back and read that report. I mean, there's a huge literature on all of this, and I heard some of you talking about that at your tables too, about how much work's been done after this and in international settings that, are broader than just a few federal agencies. There's one on early credit, social cost of carbon and social benefit of carbon reduction, suggesting reverse the table. And it says, let's make sure that the rules reflect the actual CO2 intensity of each type of CO2 emitting resource.
That still seems to get the methodology as well.
Yeah. And then how we envision its application.
That's again, I think a methodology.
Yeah, and I am seeing a lot of methodology questions or suggestions here. And I do, those are definitely interesting to me, actually more interesting than what we're supposed to be talking about. But need to have any rules of the integrated resource plans. They are good, important questions. There is one on there, though, about updates, and that's one that I think we will carry with us. That's a good question. I will tell you, just in terms of the rulemaking procedure, is that since it is in rule, not in statute, we would have the discretion to adopt a different set of values at some point in the future through a rulemaking process. It could be, just like a single issue rulemaking that we've done sometimes where, if it seems like there's merits to adopting different values, we could do that through rules and not have to go back to the legislature. That would, of course, raise questions about, well, if you did it in the first place to be consistent with the IOUs, then what do you do about your consistency? And so that's something we would have to balance.
So there would be an opportunity to raise the floor for the IOUs as well as the COUs?
And so this question was about, well, what could we do with the IOUs? And I don't know whether the UTC would have the similar kind of flexibility to do something by rule that adopts a different value. But at a minimum, the legislature can change its laws, so that section 15 that prescribes the values for IOUs could be amended by the legislature. And I just don't know about rulemaking flexibility on their side. Are you standing up because you have a statement or a question?
Well, I do have a question. I was standing up just because I was trying not to be in someone's way. But
Okay.
Nicholas Garcia, you just said something that I just want to understand administratively how you could do it. You said that you could update the numbers, but when I look at the actual statute, it says, for the purpose of this act, the cost of greenhouse gas emissions resulting from generation of electricity, including the effective emissions, is equal to the cost per ton metric, and then refers to the table you presented. So how could you update that table given that the statute specifically says that those are the numbers?
Where are you reading from, Nicholas? Is that in section 15?
I'm reading from section 15.
So that's an IOU section. And the section that we operate under, it's in section 6. Is it 14? I get mixed up.
14.3A.
14.3A. So it says, for consumer-owned utilities, use the value determined by the department, meaning the Department of Commerce. So like I say, I don't know whether the UTC could do anything given that language that's in section 15, but it's not, it's not my issue.
Okay.
John will answer this.
Well, I don't know if I'll add clarity or not, but we're dealing with separate statutes here. One is the IRP statute, which says Commerce shall set the cost for the COUs and the commission for the IOUs. The language in section 15 is in chapter 80.
Yeah, title 80.
Right. So it might create, if section 15 says that the cost of greenhouse gas shall be equal to this number as it pertains to IOUs, and you have a rule that says you can adjust or a utility can go higher, it seems that it sets up the possibility of an inconsistency on how the cost is applied across the
And I think that's a very fair point about we have heard from at least one utility that they would like to have some upward flexibility in their planning. And one observation that I would make is that if you look at the cost inputs that go into these planning exercises, you definitely see some variation in the different costs that utilities decide is an appropriate number. So, I, at least personally, am not aiming for absolute, same set of input values in everybody's plans. But, so anyway, I tend to be open to the idea that utilities can adopt higher values if they think it's appropriate based on their analytical work.
Would it also be appropriate then for a utility to apply a lower discount rate?
Can you repeat
So the
that?
question is about using a lower discount rate. So, we're going to be adopting, if this proposal, is what we go with, and what the IOUs already have, is a set of dollar numbers, in 2007 dollars. And the fact that you got to them using a 2.5 discount rate, once you pick the numbers, it really doesn't matter how you got to them. It's that number. You'll adjust it for inflation to get it into whatever the cost values that you're using in your analysis. But whether the utility said, well, I want to use a higher number because I have a lower discount rate, that seems valid to me. But there could be many reasons why a utility might decide that a higher number is more appropriate. It could be they said, well, look at all the 7 studies that came out since 2016, and the numbers are way up here. It could be something like that, too. All right, so then we can just skip the thorns? Is that what I'm hearing?
I know, we have about 6 more minutes for this activity.
Okay.
And it looks like we have a lot of questions that might not be as similar, but again, I don't hold an expertise, so.
Yeah, sure. Let's see what we got here. Why didn't the legislature specify this? That's kind of a thorn for me too. So, how does the inflation adjustment work for COUs versus IOUs? And I think this would be stated in $2,007, and if you're doing your study in $2020, how do you do that? That's a good question. I think it's one that if we need to take it on, we do that when we talk about methodology and the planning rules. What happens if EPA updates its tables, comes up with a lower or higher social cost of carbon? And that's not an if. The EPA actually has updated and come out with a lower value. And the legislature knew about that and said, no, we're using 2016. So, yeah, we wouldn't be proposing to change for that reason. But we always use 2016 numbers. And, we've talked about that some, about updating for new information versus being consistent with what the legislature said. Cost of pollution should be more proportionate to the pollution levels in your local area. So that's an argument not to use a global perspective and instead to use a local one. And so I want to respect that point of view. Should COUs be using a higher discount rate resulting in a lower cost of carbon? COUs make final decisions differently than IOUs. I'm going to put that one in another category of kind of local autonomy, local perspective, local decision making. There's little ability to change the values beyond inflation. And why is post-2050 already prescribed? That's a good question. And if you have feedback on what we should do about the post-2050 period, I'd love to hear it, when you're doing your written comments or if we have time now. But I too have wondered about that. And, what I came up with was say, well, let's just use the escalation rate that was at the end of the series and assume that it bumps out a little bit that way. It's not perfect, but it's simple. Social cost of carbon is too low relative to IPCC estimates. 2018 report. When can we raise it? We have, so this one would be about just the merits of the values themselves and, criticizing that.
Is that with discount rate too high?
That would be in that same category.
Okay.
That it's too high a discount rate being adopted. Utility may apply a greater value versus the cost of greenhouse emissions is equal to. So I guess this is maybe advocating for not giving the utilities that upward flexibility. And
We don't have a
I'm not sure
yet.
that's already covered. Why is 2.5 discount rate being used? Should Commerce have a dialogue rationalizing the use of this versus the 3% central estimate? I'm going to put that with the
Too high?
too high category. It does not identify inflation method, postpones controversy. Yep, that's true. We'll talk about that if we need to when we talk about methodology.
Okay. Should we put it in methodology over here?
Well, I mean,
Just put
it's a
methodology.
thorn. It's a thorn about, it's saying let's get to some of that methodology part.
Okay.
And I'm not, please don't take this but I think that we need to adopt a rule about how you apply this in your planning. But just that we're open to that discussion when we get to the Section 6 and Section 14 work. Can I take a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I assume most of the methodology questions are going to be, more articulated in a guidance document that will occur after you've codified the rules. So we just want to understand what the thinking is, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, good. I am too. Dave?
Have you had any conversations with the Power Council and reconciled any distinctions or the differences they may have on their social cost of carbon versus what's required here and how those may be reconciled if there are differences.
So Dave's question is about consistency with the Power Council's work on the 2021 Regional Power Plan in particular. We have had discussions about it. We've encouraged them to make sure that they're, somehow incorporating Washington requirements as they do their work. That doesn't mean that, every scenario they do will use our values, but I'm certainly hopeful that they will show how their plan would work using our values.
Okay, so it is 11 o'clock. So we have reached the time for our next agenda item. And I think we did pretty well with the Rosebud and Thorn, so thank you all for participating in that activity.
And just to close, this is another topic where written comments by September 6th, we gave you the document in Word form, so if you have suggestions or thorns or
Roses?
buds or roses, feel free to throw them into this in your comments. Thank you.
And so we're going to move these because we're going to pop into another activity on streamlining I-937. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Rebecca.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, thank you, Rachel. So the next portion of the agenda, so we're down here, is to really have a brainstorming session. It's actually, we're going to be doing an activity called brain writing. But really to capture all of your ideas on how we might streamline the EIA with CETA. If you're not really familiar with either one of them, just think about how we might streamline this bucket of rules with this bucket of rules when we're all playing in the same field. And so I can think of some like, you just, if there's reporting, like make sure your reporting is somewhat lined up would be an idea. Glenn's going to share a little bit about what his expected outcome is for this portion of the agenda, and then I'll walk you through the work we're going to do. So with that, Glenn?
Okay. And for this part, I want to acknowledge two points here. One is that it's really important that we find these opportunities to harmonize or streamline the two sets of requirements. That'll make a big difference in terms of our success at actually implementing these two laws. So that's one point. And the other point is that we don't really know what all of the requirements are going to be under the Clean Energy Transformation Act. And so in some ways, it's kind of too early to be talking about streamlining if we don't know what the CETA rules are yet, right? Some of us aren't even, completely comfortable with what the statute itself says, and I'm always thumbing through that thing and finding something that I didn't notice during any of the 100 meetings that we had during the session. And so the thought that we had here today was, because it is important that we look for these opportunities and capture them, that even though it's kind of too early to do it, we should just do it anyway. And we should start that process of brainstorming around streamlining. And we're not going to evaluate these or prioritize these. It's just the first opportunity to try to, see what's out there. And we'll continue to work on this over the course of the rulemaking. And, a year from now, we might have some really crackerjack ideas about how to make sure these things line up together. And if we do, it's probably going to be some things that came up at this meeting today. And we worked on them, we figured them out, and they turned out to be a good idea. And there'll be some others that, we go back later and look at, what the heck was that? And we'll just leave those aside. So anyway, that's the idea. I just want to explain to you why we're doing this at all right now, but also give you some perspective about, kind of the weight that they carry at this point in the work that we're doing.
So Any quick questions before Glenn, before we dive in? Yes, Rachel.
One from Skype from Matthias. Has anyone put a document together to highlight whether there is overlap between CETA and EIA?
Has anybody put together a document that has that? No, I'm serious. I mean, we've certainly benefited from other people's work summarizing the bill and that kind of thing. And so if anybody has done some of that, I'd love to see it. We haven't done it ourselves, but eventually we will. I'm sure of that.
All right, so are we ready to do some work? You're supposed to say, yes, Rebecca, we're ready. Okay, so what we're gonna have you do is spend some time thinking about what are ideas that you might have where we can streamline or, as Glenn said, harmonize between the EIA and the Clean Energy Transformation Act. And it could be a really simple word, or it could be a sentence. You have some note cards at your desk. Or at your table. And what we're going to ask you to do is write one idea per card. If you could write legibly, that would be fabulous. And in enough words that somebody else could look at it and kind of generate an idea off of it, perhaps, or add to that. And what we're going to end up doing is you're going to write your ideas one per card, and then we're going to collect all of those, and we're going to redistribute them. And we're going to build off of each other's ideas. And like Glenn shared, this is really just blue sky. What are some ideas? We're ahead of this, so maybe we can do some things now to prevent that total conflict at the end of the day. So does everybody clear? You're going to spend 2 minutes, and you're going to write one idea per card. And if you don't have any ideas, that's cool, because you'll get a card from somebody else that you can maybe build off of. But we're really looking for one idea per card, as many as you want in the next 2 minutes. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, go.
We're just brainstorming.
Or if you only have one idea, that's fine too. You can do that. Because I know you have. Like, if this were me doing it, I would just write 20-line recording. Yeah. So. Thank you. You're welcome.
I mean, where they touch that. Some might say
Well, you're saying, yeah.
I'm not sure how you get going.
Hold on, Glenn, we have a caveat.
How many different people?
Okay. You have other issues that
They got that one more minute?
I think they're not involved in this.
We're going to give him to 11:09.
I saw you pull up.
So they're handing it to us. Yep. They're wanting to hand them in.
Okay, okay.
Oh, I see one. You'll have a couple more. All right, so if you want to just not toss up your cards, but hold up your cards and we'll collect. You want to help me, Rachel? Thank you.
Your cards?
Any cards here? Oh, I grabbed it from you already. All right. Thank you. Tony, you did about 10, right?
Huh? What?
What?
When do I start?
There's a couple more. Rebecca. They're finishing up over here. There's a couple more over here. All right, thank you very much. A couple over here.
Any more cards? You're gonna get another chance, so. All right. All right, so now what we're gonna do, Rachel, you wanna help me pass them out?
Yep.
Just do.
Yep. Mix them up. Okay, mix them up.
So now what we're gonna do is you guys are gonna have the opportunity to take a look at one of your colleagues' cards. And I'll tell you what to do as soon as we get them all handed out. You wanna grab one of those?
I've got nothing.
And we might not have, did you do one each?
Yeah, but we're gonna run short.
We're gonna run short. Okay, so some of you might get more time to work alone. Okay, here. I'm gonna pass the
Yeah, we're lacking ideas, but we'll get more. I have faith.
We're out of cards. Okay, so.
We're out of cards.
Every table needs to get some ideas.
Are those from you guys?
You got yours back?
All right,
I'll take it,
so.
that was a good one. Got it. Did you get yours back too?
No, I.
Okay.
I got the bell over here.
I actually
Okay.
found it.
Well, if anyone wants to add on. I handed them back.
Okay, so. Now what we're gonna have you do, if you were fortunate enough to get a card, you're gonna get a minute. And if you didn't get a card, you get another minute to come up with an idea. Because I know you're gonna dig deep, you're gonna go deep and come up with the best idea yet. So, but we're gonna give you a minute if you have a card. Really? If you have a card, I want you to read it and either add to it if you have a way to clarify it or make it a little better. Or if it spawns another idea, go ahead and create another card. When you get done, go ahead and hand it up, and Rachel and I will redistribute it because we didn't have enough cards for everybody to get one. So we're going to do this a couple of times, but now I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute to take a look at the card you have or come up with that really most amazing idea to make this all magic. All right? Got a minute. Yeah, I'll write it on the card.
You're writing it on the same card.
Right, yeah, if you want to improve that one. If you don't have anything to add to that. Right, you're going to try and add to it. You like it? Okay, perfect.
Do you have any new or added on to yet?
No, I said you
The build, you have to build.
Good question. Put it like a star.
Yeah.
All right.
Are you gonna do one? Or you're still working on it?
Hey, you guys.
You can, if you want.
Fling it out.
If you would like.
Did you bring your dazzler? I forgot mine at home.
What?
Yeah.
But I am.
All right.
I'll collect yours. Thank you.
All right.
All right, got another one? Okay, so we're gonna collect cards again. Because you guys are getting into this now.
Thank you.
Great idea.
Are you collecting?
I'm passing back out.
Here's some more then.
Thank you.
Okay.
You guys have anything to think about?
Are you, she's passing them back.
More. It's an ongoing. There's gonna be, sorry. New thought.
That's okay.
Looks like he's talked about that one.
Here, we'll give them.
So does everybody have an idea that they need to now pass on? Me. I'm going back to new one.
Also,
Wiley.
oh yeah, where do you guys want to go?
I got two more. I can give it, up the front here, we'll give that front. Here's the card. You look like you need a new card. It's probably yours. Wasn't on it.
To reduce redundancy.
Oh, yeah. I know. I want 100 ideas.
Buckle down, y'all.
Dig deep. All right, you guys dig deep? Give me one, get three. Do I need the dazzler? Oh, no. You want me to take that one too? All right, I got that. Nothing to add and no comment. Yeah, repass that. Okay. Oh, you. Those are the same ones we had.
You already get.
Oh, they just had that one. All
Try
right.
again.
Okay, sorry.
Subject matter experts. I know, it's hard to.
Where's our A+ students? Back here. Oh.
Interim targets in.
I already shuffled.
Come here, you look like you're waiting for us too. You guys pass those along? Here, I need some in the back. That's the best
Do
one.
we have any ready to move on?
I'll take those. Thank you very much. You want some new
Rachel?
Sure.
Thank you. This table over here, right here needs some work. Here, I'll grab those. Have you guys seen this one before?
Yeah, we did.
To build more ideas. Thank you very much.
Let's see. This one and this one.
Please review. Do you need some fresh ideas? Here's some fresh ideas. May they not be yours for me.
You know what? I so appreciate somebody that shows up with a binder.
Yeah, that's old school, that's for sure. Establish a sunset date. That's policy. Important to preserve low income religion. WRT, contacted CIA.
I know. Well, you guys are drawing. And that's it. We're not prioritizing. We're not gonna talk about.
How much longer? I'm just.
Oh, we have like. Yeah. I think we're gonna type up the road one right now. Probably benefit. I'll like it. I feel like I should be out in the field. All right, so, no, you get to keep them now, because now what y'all get to do is, to the best extent that you can, take those cards. Here, can you hand me one here?
Yeah.
And come up here, and this one works out great because it's aligned reporting requirements. I can figure that one out. And just stick it up here on the wall, underneath the area where you think it best fits. And if it doesn't fit under any of these areas, then go ahead and put it over here under other. And so, and then what we're going to invite you to do is just take a look at them and see if it stimulates any other ideas for you. So, we have about the next 10 minutes to get them bucketed. So, pick someone and send them on their mission. Okay, rock, paper, scissors.
There's no wrong answer.
Isn't that sticky wall awesome?
Yeah.
Yeah, just go up and.
Oh, we have to do it.
Just press the card up on the
I
card.
ran out of time. Want me to clarify? No.
Magic.
I ran out of time. cut and cut.
That can be easily rectified.
Participation. Scoring. To the extent that our questions fit in those categories. There's thousands of them.
Harry, you want to make sure we get some done, right? It's a lot of responsibility.
I'm trying to maintain the
Show me the grid. Where's the spreadsheet? Yeah, okay, yeah, so that's encourage them to get to train.
Because that is, for me, that strikes really important.
And your ideas have made their way up there?
No,
You're welcome to go
all but
back
one
and
were
see
like.
the other ones. You're on your way out.
Skills.
Seems like we have an awful lot of.
Now that recording one was a good one.
That was really.
Did your ideas start to get up there? Your ideas cards are up there? They're up there?
It's gray.
So did everybody's cards get up on the blue sticky tarp? Awesome. Okay, so that was it, right? We want you to continue to think about ways that we might harmonize, as Glenn liked to say, or streamline. And as we move into the work, do you, Glenn, want ideas to come into you as we move forward? We are going to capture these and collect these and.
Yeah, I mean, we're always willing to get suggestions on any part of this, but I don't have a request for a specific comment date or something like that around streamlining suggestions. It is something that I see us carrying with us over the course of this rulemaking, and we may, do something like this again or in some other way as we get a better sense in our minds about the CETA requirements, how that could be carried over into the EIA requirements and streamline things. So nothing specific on that, but just let's continue to have it as part of our thinking as we go forward with this, and comments are always appreciated.
It is interesting to note, and this came up at the last workshop around planning requirements and reporting requirements and really making sure there's harmony between those. So,
yeah, I mean, I think just visually, reporting requirements, I mean, if you can't line those up, then, surely we can do that. So I think that's the most fertile area that we have in terms of streamlining all this. And we will, and I look forward to seeing what's under the question mark. I bet there's some good ideas over there too. So, anyway, thank you for your ideation, as they say.
Let's bring your brain ready. All right. So we're going to, one of the things that we wanted to do is wrap that portion up a little bit earlier because there's a lot of questions in the room. And Glenn wanted to have a little bit more time for the Q&A. And if the Q&A runs short, we can always get you out early, which who doesn't like to get out of a meeting early, right? So with that, I'm going to, we're just going to have a question and answer session. Glenn, do you have any fences that you want to put on the Q&A period? Like, what are you doing for dinner?
Different. And I think what I want to do actually is do a and Q, because I already know what the first question is going to be, so why don't I just go ahead and answer it? And that is, what's going to happen next? And so in terms of that, And this, we'll post this on the website too, so everybody's got access to it. But we'll be publishing a more thorough implementation plan. We think we'll do it next week. We've been coordinating that with our colleagues at the Utilities and Transportation Commission. In fact, Andrew, could you stand up for a second? This is the visual. We're joined at the hips. I need to get a little taller. Now, that's not true on every. Thank you, Andrew. You can sit down. That won't be true on everything. And if you just look at the rules, you can see that there are some differences in how their rules are put together and how ours are. But we are going to try to work through this process with them, not too far ahead of them and not too far behind them. And there are a couple of areas where we're going to be really with them. And one of those is in terms of the wholesale markets. The statute itself says that we're supposed to do it together, and we will. And we're working on an earlier start to that process than what we had originally envisioned. And then the other one is around the methodology for the cost rules. That's an area where, I'll sometimes talk about that we want to start working on Section 6, Section 14. When I say that, I'm really not referring to the methodology for the cost rules. We're going to wait and do that more closely aligned with the schedule that the UTC has, but still in time for us to hit our statutory deadline next year. And so the next thing that we're planning to get you together and work on is around the planning requirements. So the Section 6 and Section 14, we're planning to do a workshop on that on September 18th back here. And one request that I have is I would like to get some presentations from people who are kind of in the thick of this and who have tried to figure out for their own work, how am I going to make that work with my IRP schedule that I've got and all that. So if there are volunteers for people who would be willing to start that discussion with, a short presentation on the work that they're doing and the questions that they're struggling with about how they fit everything together, please get back to me later, send me an email or call me or something, and we'll try to pick out 2 or 3 or 4 people who can represent the range of perspectives to get that meeting started on the 18th. And then on the 21st of October, we're planning to be in the capital of the world, Wenatchee, Washington, in the afternoon on that day. And we're going to start on reporting and compliance issues at that one. Exactly what's in that category, we're going to have to figure out. But, some of it will be things like, okay, well, what date should this report be submitted? But other things could be around, how do I show that I have complied with CETA? What are the required elements to demonstrate compliance? And as you can see, just like Michelle suggested, we're not going to try to solve all the planning requirement stuff before we start working on the reporting and compliance. We're going to do this in the messy way, the productive way. And then after that, we're going to be back in Olympia on November 13th. It's going to be another afternoon meeting. And I think we're not going to get everything done on the reporting and compliance part. And maybe we won't have gotten everything done on the planning part. So that meeting may be kind of a, let's pick up where we left off kind of meeting. And then December 12th. And I'm hoping to do that one in Seattle, but I don't have that figured out yet. So December 12th, location to be determined. We think that'll be in the morning. So those are the next 4 workshop dates. Gets us through the calendar year. You will look at that list and say, but what about this and what about that? And I think you'll get a little better sense of that some of those other topics are ones that we've actually said, well, we're not going to start on those until 2020. But anyway, we're not trying to hit every topic before we get to the end of this year. You had a question?
I didn't get the November date.
Sure. Maybe I didn't say it. It's November 13th, afternoon. I'll be back in here. Brittany?
Todd has a question on Skype. Can you repeat the September 18th meeting agenda? What would you like presentations on?
Sure. It'll be on the rules to implement sections 6 and section 14. And so we're looking for presentations from people who are involved in the integrated resource planning work now, and not just the utilities. I mean, a lot of us are involved in that. And the issues that they have identified in trying to comply with the Clean Energy Implementation Plan requirements in Section 6, and the questions that they feel like need to be addressed in order for them to implement the statute. Amanda?
Does the double counting of recs or potential for double counting of recs fall into a category of worthwhile presentations?
Not, probably, and Amanda's asking about the double counting issue. I see that as part of this work group that we'll be putting together for the wholesale market transactions. If the UTC looks at it differently, then, we'll need to adjust accordingly, but we're not planning, I don't know, I don't see it coming up right away.
Got it. Thank you.
And Brady, if there was another question.
There is. Can we just clarify those 4 dates?
Sure. So September 18th, 9 a.m. in Olympia. October 21st, 1:30 p.m. in Wenatchee. November 13th, 1 p.m. in Olympia. November 12th, 9 a.m. I'm sorry, December 12th, 9 a.m. probably in Seattle. Okay, and Dave, you had a question?
No, for 10 a.m.
December 12th. Glenn, is the topic for December 12th a continuation of what doesn't get done on the 13th, which is a continuation of the 21st or TBD?
TBD. Topic is TBD on the 12th. Dave?
Have you talked to Ecology about when they will start their rulemaking on the ETPs and how you'll coordinate with that?
What does ETP stand for?
Energy transformation projects. They've got to come up with a carbon reduction equivalents, which then have to be folded into your rules.
Yes, we have talked to the Department of Ecology, and we're meeting with them next week to do some planning work. And that's going to be a 2020 topic, and and it's one that they will be leading, and so it'll be somebody other than me who'll be standing up and walking up and down the aisle with all these people. I'll get to sit over on the side like
When you
that.
say 2020, you'll still intend to incorporate them into the final rule due next year, correct?
My understanding is we're required to, they are required to adopt those rules by the end of 2020.
Each of those meetings, Glenn, will be 3 hours anticipated.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're planning for anyway.
Any chance we could do the one in Seattle starting at 10, so it's a little easier to get to as far as traffic goes?
I'll look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one,
Maybe
December.
9:30 would be better.
I'll take a look at that.
I think, Ms.
Question in the back.
Okay.
We have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Glenn. I'm Charlie Black. I'm a consultant for Invenergy. And I have a question about where and how the topic of reliability is going to be addressed in rulemaking. In particular, well, when and in what context? In particular, is the reliability off-ramp, if you will, is that going to be addressed as an ex ante, before the fact, we gotta take the off ramp, or is it going to be after the fact? The system blew up, and could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I don't know if people heard, but questions about reliability issues, and I see that coming up in the planning requirements to the extent that if there need to be rules that say that, when you're doing a clean energy implementation plan, that your reliability standard needs to have certain, aspects to it. But then it also could come up in the compliance requirements where, okay, if we're using that off-ramp the way you described it, how do we do that, and what do we need to show, that it was legit to have made that choice. So I think it could come up in both of those contexts.
Okay, just a follow-up on that. Is this going to be, is the scope of that going to be within the utility's own resource plan, or kind of leading question in the context of a broader what's going on in the region and the industry as a whole as far as resource adequacy?
That question is so easy, but I'm just not going to try to answer it. No,
it's a real one.
Yeah, no, and it's a great question, and I really I think we need to talk about that. Yes.
Hi, Tashiana Wayne, the Public Generating Tool. And sorry if I missed it, but the social cost of carbon, did you intend to try to get those rules done by the end of the year, or was that included in the larger rulemaking?
Our hope is to adopt a rule setting the social cost of carbon values by the end of this year. It will not, end the discussion of social cost of carbon, because it does come up. I'm guessing it will come up in the discussion about potential planning rules, more methodology type questions. So, yeah. And that's one reason why we'd like, if we can get written comments on that particular part, the language that we went over today by September 6th, and we can make good progress on wrapping that up by the end of this year. So let me thank you all for coming and participating in this way. I'm glad we were able to get everybody into one room this time. If I do my math, by the time we get to that 5th workshop, it's only going to be, like me and Sean and nobody else. I'm really looking forward to that. But I do appreciate your willingness to engage with each other and with us on this. And we've got some time, and so if there are questions, or people want to have closing comments they want to offer, and talk to Rebecca. She's in charge.
Yeah, we know this is the work that we wanted to get done today. We thank you so much for your time. I know that time is like our biggest asset that we have, and we appreciate you spending it with us. On your way out, if you want to take pictures of what we have up there on the blue tarp, you're welcome to do that. Before we go our separate ways, are there any questions that you really need Dr. Blackman, our very, very, very special guest, to answer? Tony?
No.
We got them all answered.
He already told me what he did for his vacation, so I'm happy.
Okay, so if Tony doesn't have any questions, no, are there any other questions for the good of the order? So just, we wanted to discuss potential changes to the existing rules and get some forward progress on that, and I think we did that. We got some feedback on the greenhouse gas, the social cost of greenhouse gas Brittany reminded me that we're all made out of carbon, so it's good to not just leave it at carbon, because we all have social costs. And then we did some rapid idea generation on how to streamline. So I think we got everything done today that we wanted to get done. I hope you feel like you got something good out of this. I would like for you to give yourselves a hand for
As our facilitators.
and go about and have a great day. And just know we got you out 21 minutes early.
We have a community early adoption. I intend on coming to.